Hi, what's up, what's up? It is your boy RC Apologist here with Theological Discussion, and I am your host, RC Apologist. Alright, welcome and thank you for tuning into the show for today's episode, regardless if you're watching this live or if you're watching this at a later time of your own convenience. Now, today's episode is going to be going over an interesting conversation that I listened to or heard about, and I decided to check it out, considering this was shown by one individual who goes by the name of the Adam Friended or whatnot. He's had some controversy, essentially is what I've gathered from it, and what I've seemed to notice is that the main controversy is he's an atheist that's trying to defend, religion, especially from what I've gathered, Christianity. So as a result, I wanted to take a look and have some time dedicated to take in a little snippet or some views of what's going on in this debate that happened over the night, and we'll see where to go from there. So I'm going to get my thing up. Yep, there we go. Now, Adam Friended is on the left for some of those who aren't familiar with him. And then there's this new person named Michel or whoever. Never heard of him before. And what we're going to do is just go over the part where they start getting into actually talking with each other instead of just the opening statements. And we're going to go over some issues that were brought up. And if y'all got any comments, feel free to make some in the live chat. And feel free to share the link out as well if you want. Which, speaking of which, let me check something real quick. At least put the live thing. Anyways, also another thing, if I sound like I got a lot of energy going on, funny story, I actually had one of them Rain energy drinks, the Rain body fuel that kind of is trying to compete with the Bang energy drinks. Yeah, first time I've had caffeine in a long time, and that was definitely a lot much more than I needed. So, had a big, massive headache as a result. So, who knows, maybe there's still a bit of it in my system, and heck, could use that. Alright, anyways, going on with that, we're going to take a look and go over where both these people went wrong with some of their statements and where they have their error, especially for Adam, who is trying to defend the idea of Christianity or Christian morality versus secular morality, when I don't think he comprehends what the concept of Christian morality is, or even Christians would get their concept of morality from, or what anyone would get their morality from. That's why I openly invite Adam Friended, if he ever wants to discuss these things, on a thing here. But anyways, let me pull up the interact feature, pull us on full screen, and begin, which by the way we're on a 1.25 speed to make sure to save up on time. And also got to plug in so that way our battery doesn't die. Alright, let's let me first make sure. Okay, we got our audio playing. And let's roll.
Okay, on my debates, I usually do a steelman section where I just try to steelman your argument, just so we know that we're clear. So I'm going to do that now. You made a lot of points. I'm going to try and summarize your argument. So you and I are in agreement where morality is a set of rules, a set of rules that dictate behavior. We're in agreement there. You did note that there's a separation between the actual rules and the enforcement of the rules. So there is the actual list of behavioral rules, and obviously humans can do those rules or not do those, or follow those rules or not follow those rules. So there is an enforcement aspect of this. And in secular law, obviously we have like police forces, we have all kinds of ways of enforcing law. So you're saying secular law is better than biblical law. So you're making the argument that Christian morality is biblical morality. It's the morality that's laid out in the Bible.
Not exactly.
Okay.
Christian law, or the law that comes from the Bible, is the codification of Christian morality. That's what it is. It's a codification of it. It's not necessarily the same thing, but it's how it is codified. Because a system of morality is only as good as it can be enforced. If it's not enforced, then it has no purpose.
So you're saying that a system of morality is only as good as the enforcement mechanisms involved in the system of morality?
Pardon?
You're saying that a system of morality is dependent upon enforcement, that it's only as good as the enforcement mechanisms involved.
Yeah, if it cannot be enforced in any way, then it serves no purpose. It needs to be enforced.
Okay, so I need to press on this point, because it seems to me that the flaw in your argument is that that you're conflating Christian morality and your interpretation of of the Bible, because you're saying that biblical morality, you pointed out things like rape, murder, slavery, original sin, all things that you disagree with, that you think are a part of Christian morality. Do you think Christians think that rape is moral?
What is the source of morality for Christianity? What is the source?
Well, there's two components here. There's a textual component where I think we'll agree, and then there's the interpretation of the text. Like we have even.
So what Adam seems to indicate here concerning where he thinks where Christians get morality, is in two components, which I can agree there's a textual one concerning the Bible, but then he says the second component is simply interpretation, which is essentially saying the same thing. It's going back to a textual thing. So he's not saying that there's two, apparently. It's just one thing to him. Whereas where a Christian gets morality, we get it from God. And to point this out, we're going to take a pause for this real quick. Go to our online Bible software. Go to Romans chapter 2. Go to verse 14 to 15. For when the Gentiles, meaning the non-Jews, which have not the law, meaning they don't have the law of the Torah written with them, or they don't adhere to it in terms of having a text that indicates it, which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, these, having not the law, are a law unto themselves, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the mean, while accusing or else excusing one another. So right here in verses 14 to 15 of Romans chapter 2, we read that they have the law written in their heart, meaning it was given to them by God, so that the Gentiles, while not having the textual law, have morality because it was given unto them by God. And they don't have to read it, it's already in their hearts. Their own nature lets them know what's morally right and wrong. That's why a person can look and see that murder is wrong, that rape is wrong, because they are made in the image of God and have the law written in their hearts. So it's not just simply up to biblical interpretation of the matter concerning morality. It's the matter of we get the concept of morality, or we get our morality from God. And yes, Metal Minister in the live chat beat me to it, apparently. Yeah. Alright, so let's continue.
In secular law, they have laws on the books, but we have courts that interpret those laws. We have
No, fair enough, absolutely. But these things that I mentioned, they are not open to interpretation. They're very
well,
clear.
how are they not open? Like we have a Supreme Court.
In terms of slavery, there is no interpretation. They are very clear in the Bible.
All right, now before we get to her position on supposedly the issue of condoning slavery in the Bible, because we're going to wait until she gives the verse, but if you notice what Adam has said so far, what he seems to suggest and indicate is that all of a sudden that with the Bible, the way that it works is, okay, like in Congress with the Constitution or whatnot, you interpret it based on a group of collective. That's not how it works. To suggest that that's how interpretation or even morality is then discussed in the Christian worldview is to show not much knowledge on the fact of the matter concerning how we are to handle these subjects. So again, this is where I'm going to have to disagree with Adam here, and I noticed that he's in the chat saying, cool, thanks for the response. Well, thank you for participating. If you want, you could even come in if we have enough time during the show, if you wish, via Discord. But at the moment, I want to kind of go over a little bit what's mentioned in the bits of where I did take issue back. So, again, because we're going to do this when refuting what she mentions about slavery. It's not about, okay, let's look at the collective task of scholars or anything like that on their interpretation. It's, let's look at the text and exegete it. This is something that can be done with a basic level of understanding on hermeneutics and exegesis, that's the inductive Bible study method is a thing that is where people can learn how to interpret and study the Bible for themselves without the usage of scholars. This is something that scholars have handed down to people, so that way they don't need to always rely on scholars to interpret the Bible. They can rely on what the scholars have taught them as how they would then try to examine and study it on their own. So in other words, to study the Bible like a scholar, to study it like someone who is very well studied and versed in the Bible. So we're going to use that method once we get to what she's about to say on the slavery issue.
That slavery is sanctioned in the Bible. There is not.
Do Christians today accept slavery as part of their moral system?
If they don't, they are not following God's law.
So that's your interpretation.
So if we're going to go with that, then, because of course that's not what she's not going to go to this, but concerning the Old Testament, we are not under those laws. And there is a video that's coming out soon. Right now working on the script of it, and there's a book that I'd recommend people to get called The Law of Christ by Charles Lader. Very good book, and will definitely be a good bit of what goes into the video that I'm planning on. So that being said, let's take a look more into this as to what she claims is where the Bible condones slavery.
Interpretation of God's law.
No, it's not.
Well, what about the abolitionists? The abolitionists use different. The American abolitionists used the Bible. Their interpretation of the Bible was slavery was wrong.
They ignored.
Okay, and this is where, again, my whole main conflict and issue gets at is when you have, it's saying, instead of going to the actual text or any of the matter where this happens, we're instead going to, okay, what about the abolitionists, what they have to say? Well, how did they come to the conclusion? Let's examine what the reasons were instead of just simply saying these were abolitionists, and what they said about it. Let's actually get into an exegesis, which is what we're going to do in a bit.
All the verses that sanctions slavery.
Your camera failed. Sorry.
Yeah, I hate doing shit here.
But you acknowledge that your interpretation is in conflict with the abolitionists' interpretation.
It's not a matter of it's not a matter of interpretation. It's in the text. If they ignore certain if they ignore certain passages of the Bible,
right,
then if they are ignoring certain passages of the Bible, it's not a matter of interpretation. It's a matter of cherry picking. It's not the same thing as interpretation.
If a secular law is enacted in the United States, whose interpretation of that law matters more, mine or the Supreme Court justices?
Well, there is the difference though, because what the Supreme Court does in America is to check if a law or if a procedure in court is in accordance to the Constitution. It's to check the constitutionality of a law or of a decision of a court.
And when they do that, what are they doing?
And the Constitution is not up for debate. The Constitution is very clear what it is and what are the rules in the Constitution.
If the Constitution is clear, then why do we need a Supreme Court to interpret it?
We don't. But the Supreme Court is not questioning the interpretation of the Constitution.
What?
It's questioning the interpretation. It's questioning the interpretation of a court's decision or of a law, not the Constitution.
The current interpretation of the Second Amendment of the Constitution says that anybody can have firearms. There is a difference of opinion on that interpretation. The left has one interpretation and the right has a completely different interpretation.
It's interpreting. No, what is interpreting is the decisions of the court are in accordance to what the Second Amendment says, or laws that came after the Second Amendment. That is how constitutional law works. The Constitution is not being questioned. The Constitution is very clear.
So, I just want to make sure before we move on that you understand my counter argument. So I am saying, and do I understand your argument correctly? That you're saying you're saying Christian morality is based on the Bible, and that the Bible is only interpreted we are only able to interpret the Bible in one way, and that is the way that you've selected
No,
to interpret
not what I
it.
said. No,
Okay.
that's not what I said. What I said is that the source of Christian morality is God.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible codifies God's law, God's moral values into laws.
You yourself are an atheist, though, right? Like,
yes, I am an atheist.
I'm an atheist, so there is no God. So how can the source be God?
Because, number one, all men know God exists. I was having this set up for the verse she was going to pull up, but because of this, I didn't necessarily anticipate it. We're going to go ahead and go to it. Go to Romans chapter 1. Start over in verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, in these people, these ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold this truth in unrighteousness. Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. In verse 20, here's the real deal breaker. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. In fact, even as John Gill comments concerning this phrase, so they are without excuse, means the very heathens who have only the light of nature and are destitute of a revelation have no color or pretext for their idolatrous practices and vicious lives, nor have they, nor will they have anything to object to God's righteous judgment against them, or why they should not be condemned. So, concerning all this, they know God exists. So, and again, we went over earlier what I was mentioned in the next chapter, which is in verses 14 to 15. But when the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, these, having not the law, are a law unto themselves, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, meaning it's in their hearts, they have that in them because it was written in there by God, their conscience also bearing witness in their thoughts of the mean, while accusing or else excusing one another. So we have that laid out and established right there. And let me go ahead and get the verse we're going to go to later back on save, so that way we can get there later. But I just want to make that point out concerning to Adam.
Source has to be the text.
If you're a Christian, you believe. If you're a Christian, you believe the source is God.
Well,
Exactly.
But neither one of us are Christians, so let's talk about the actual source.
Well, what is the actual source in that case? Would be the same case.
Actual source is still God, but okay.
According to what I believe, is the same case as a secular morality. The source is knowledge and experience. But of course, there is where the difference is. Christian morality determines that God and Jesus are perfect. They are morally perfect, and whatever is in the Bible is not up for questioning because it is perfect.
So it is the Bible. I'm just like, we're both saying that the.
All right, to correct her on one thing, concerning the questioning or what's in the Bible or not, there actually is areas where you can question certain things. In fact, that's actually things that are in certain areas of the Bible encouraged because, number one, it encourages you to not just simply accept what the people tell you, but to examine the scriptures and to test them. And then the second thing that is in regards to that is that there's even areas in the Old Testament especially where we see this, where some figures, hold up, I'm going to just pull this up while I do the talking here for a bit because I'm going to go on a bit of a rant, where you have some people, for example, Jephthah, who ended up sacrificing his daughter. I used to think that was referring to sacrifice just the virginity and make sure that she stays a virgin is in the temple for a while. But after doing extensive research, I discovered that what you then have was that it's not about someone that's being a just or person viewed in a high regard or a high esteem. In fact, it's actually just someone that's, he made this on his own. God didn't tell him to do this, and God didn't say he approved of it. This was a thing that was going entirely on with what Jephthah himself did. In fact, Josephus in Antiquities of the Jews, Book 5, Chapter 8, comments on this passage, saying, however, this action was to befall her was not ungrateful to her, since she should die upon occasion of her father's victory and the liberty of her fellow citizens. She only desired her father to give her leave for 2 months to bewail her youth with fellow citizens, and then she agreed. Then at the forementioned thee, he might do with her according to his vow. Accordingly, when that time was over, he sacrificed his daughter as a burnt offering, offering such an oblation as was neither conformable to the law, meaning it was not with what God taught in his law, nor was it acceptable to God, not weighing with himself what opinion the hearers would have had of such a practice. And in fact, in David M. Gunn, in his commentary on Judges Through the Centuries, page 135, says, both men deserved punishment, many judged. Ecclesiastes Rabbah reasons that God's Spirit left Phinehas from here, and so it's talking about another instance here where Jephthah is still involved. But it says, previously God was with him, while Jephthah gradually lost his limbs, buried where they dropped. So Jephthah was buried in the cities, plural, of Gilead, as Judges 12:7 states. Also, in the commentary by Rashi, it says that there was adding boils to dismemberment. So, and then Barry G. Webb on the Book of Judges in his New International Commentary on the Old Testament, the exegesis of the passage has shown Jephthah was wrong to make the vow in the first place. Not only was it unnecessary, God would have given him the victory anyway, but it was effectively a bribe and therefore a denial of his bold public expression of confidence in Yahweh, the righteous judge, in 11:27. Furthermore, since child sacrifice was a pagan rite condemned in the law of Moses, to do it, even in fulfillment of a vow, would be to commit an abomination, according to Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 35, and therefore to incur God's judgment rather than secure his help. So in other words, what we have is that Jephthah instead is not viewed as a hero, but instead is rather viewed as someone that committed an abomination and was an enemy of God. And as other traditions pointed out, what you can then see is that Jephthah was even he had to end up paying the price for that whole thing there. And there is a conversation going on in the live chat with me and Adam Friend, and he points out that after I said that I don't think it's a consistent or defendable approach to defend Christianity from an atheist perspective, and he thinks it is. The problem is that atheism denies the worldview of the supernatural, and also as a result, from what we've seen from Adam so far in his perspective and in his worldview, has ended up misrepresenting and not even accurately displaying, portraying what actual Christian teachings is, as well as not being honest with himself on these matters about what the issue is with, for example, the fact that he knows God exists, and the fact that we know morality because it is from God and is written in our hearts. So those are things we have to consider. Those are the truths that we have to acknowledge, just like when we use like flat earthers will deny it, that about the shape of the earth, but yet they utilize things that only work consistently within a globe earth model that would fit that perspective, that would fit in that framework, that would fit in that worldview. To basically use the atheist perspective to defend Christianity is the same thing of trying to use basic kitchen utensils for cooking to start using measurements on a house, essentially. Like, instead of tape or a measuring stick or any of these things that can do that, you have to use cooking utensils, pots and pans and all that kind of stuff, and it doesn't work because they're for different means and they're for different tools. So you need the right tools for the job, and especially for this, you need the Christian worldview and the Christian perspective to consistently account for these things. Just like I don't think the atheist perspective in any way, shape, or form can consistently account for morality or anything like that. Hence why he seems to be in favor, and he knows that you need the Christian worldview, need Christian morality to consistently account for morality, because him as an atheist, if you were to use his atheist perspective and worldview, he wouldn't be able to consistently defend or account for morality. He has to borrow from Christianity as a result. But that's besides the point. Let's continue onward.
The set of rules that constitutes Christian morality comes from the Bible, correct? We agree there.
The set of rules of Christianity comes from the Bible. Yes.
Okay, so we're in agreement there.
Yes.
So the difference of agreement that I think we have is that you're saying there's only one way to interpret the Bible, and I'm saying that there's many. Okay, so you agree with me. You agree with me. There's many different interpretations to the Bible, correct?
No, there are certain passages that aren't up for interpretation. There are certain passages that they're very clear.
Okay, but aren't there just as many other passages that will contradict the passage that's very clear? The problem with the Bible is
in terms of slavery, it's not a.
So there's where definitely where the problem is. If he's going to try to use that and go with the issue with the Bible, he says there's a problem with the Bible. I don't think there is, and we're going to get into it where there aren't any contradictory passages on essential matters that are about this. So let's continue.
Up for questioning in terms of slavery, because it's the New Testament condones it again. The New Testament confirms that slaves must obey their masters. It's on the New Testament.
Okay.
It is confirmed.
So
it doesn't question at all. It confirms slavery.
So you're saying on the topic of slavery, and I don't know, I'm not a biblical scholar or anything, but you're saying on the topic of slavery that the Bible is completely clear, that there's no counter to the idea that slavery is wrong. The abolitionists the abolitionists actually pulled from the Bible to say that slavery was wrong, though.
And again, Adam, this is where you're not going to get far if you're just going to keep using that appealing to other people thing, because that's just not how it works. And because you say you're not a Bible scholar and you suggest that that's where we can get the whole thing, they wouldn't even tell you that's how it's done. They would actually say that that's actually how you do the worst example of trying to get a take on it. What you do is you examine the text with hermeneutics and exegesis. And this is something that people can do, utilizing proper hermeneutics to read and study the Bible themselves.
I mean, I don't know. Everyone's cherry picking. That's my point. You're cherry picking.
But if it's cherry
picking, just say as well that you're cherry
picking. Hold on.
All right, so we're going to stop there and go to the verse that she had mentioned. But first of all, a couple of things. Number one, with the Old Testament, I've already had mirrored videos about it, about what does the Old Testament teach, and there are two perspectives on this. Both I think that are actually pretty decent and good views on. The one that I hold to is that what you have was not slavery, but rather indentured servitude, and this has been noted by scholars and historians on the matter of what the Hebrew word is. While there is indeed a debate that goes on, like for example Gordon Wenham, a scholar that I respect, does believe that they're referring to slavery. I do believe that the evidence indicates that these are indeed just indentured servants, and that it's in a different culture than what we would have with our issue concerning anything about servants. While there's parallels, it still is different because of the fact it was in an ancient Near Eastern context. But what we're then seeing is that even then we have another view where, for example, Dr. Michael Brown holds to this, and he debated Joshua Bowen on the modern day debate about this issue about was slavery in the Old Testament morally permissible, where he does say yes, this is slavery, but the issue is that it is much different than the other slavery. It's basically utilizing the culture of that time but altering it and making a radicalization change to it. Essentially another example that would be of a comparison would be, okay, you have work, but while the usual structure of work has traditionally been you have a boss that's the general manager over the things, you have your own individual bosses of certain fields and productions, and then you have your regular staff members. This one tries to do it, okay, it's the same business and everything, but now you get to be your own boss. There is no simple basic hierarchy. It's you're your own boss and you get to work with it, as long as, of course, you still follow the guidelines and the rules. But other than that, you get to set the hours of when you get to come in, You get to do all this. It's taking something in that same business and then radicalizing it with a different perspective. And so in this view, it's saying that slavery was radicalized with a different perspective that makes it much more humanistic and fair than every other surrounding ancient Near Eastern culture that would utilize slavery. So again, there's that perspective and there's that view, both of which don't seem to condone slavery for us, because again, either way, this all goes back to the Mosaic law. This all goes back to the Old Testament law, which the Bible itself says we are not under the law. So anyways, that's being said, let's take a look at the passage that was brought up. So we go over here to Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5. That's where we're starting. It's where it says, "Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling and singleness of your heart as unto Christ." Okay. So right here, now of course the main problem with they would probably go is, like, for example, if you say we go to the Holman Christian Standard Bible, it would utilize slaves. So some use slaves, others use servants, bond servants. So you have different texts that would utilize a difference there. But let's take a look at this. First of all, to discover if this is indeed talking about slavery, let's go to the Greek word is doulos. It is, according to the Mickelson's Enhanced Strong's dictionaries, translated as either slave, bondservant, or a voluntarily devoted full servant. All right. So we're going to take a look, first of all, at the... we're going to look at Thayer's in a bit, but I want to pull up the Mounce's complete expository dictionary of the Old and New Testament words. Okay? So let me pull up this here. All right, so first there's... we're going to utilize what we find in Mounce. And it says, doulos refers to a servant or slave, usually a male slave such as Onesimus in Philemon 16. Many of Jesus' parables are stories of how servants related to their masters. The ancient world had an economy driven by slavery. People became slaves either as prisoners of war or because of economic debt. So in the second part, what you then have is, servant in the form of an indentured servitude due to trying to pay the debt off. But the first one is definitely what we would consider the slavery thing, because it is a prisoner of war. Now here's where we get to something. Paul calls on slaves to be obedient to their masters, even unmerciful ones. And that's where we get to Ephesians 6:5. And according to another passage, in fact, let's go there right now. It is in Colossians chapter 3, verse 22. "Servants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in singleness of heart, fearing God." So we see another similar instance there, and we can connect that with Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5. And actually you can see that even more so in verse 6, where it says the same thing, not with the eye service as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. So we have that right there. And according to Mounce in his dictionary, he does say that Paul is calling on slaves to be obedient to their masters, even unmerciful ones. So according to Mounce, this is... the definition of this is a slave, not just simply a bondservant. But in this context, it's a slave. Though the could group servants into this, it does seem to suggest that what he's mainly focusing on is especially slaves, in light of what else is being indicated with the text. But here's what Mounce also says. Mounce says, although Paul does not discourage a slave from seeking his freedom, as in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 20 through 24, true freedom is to be found in Jesus Christ. So right there, we have the issue. We have the point that this is indeed just simply referring to the whole thing of people that are to submit and obey the masters. That is what the text says. This is what scholars say. In fact, to point out again what the meaning of this is, we're going to go to Thayer's Greek lexicon. and search for when the example is used in Ephesians. According to the text, it is a slave, bondman, or a man of servile condition. That is how it is defined in the usage of the context. And it's in a properly literal context, whereas then it shows another one where it doesn't utilize what we're talking about of Ephesians in a metaphorical sense. In fact, actually, if you go to verse 6, there is a time where the word doulos is used here, but it's in a metaphorical context because the issue is as the servants of Christ, as the slaves to Christ. Whereas in this one is definitely referring to servants in a literal sense, especially considering the masters are according to the flesh. Now, what's going on here? Why does he say this? Well, let's keep reading. With goodwill, doing service as to the Lord, not to men, knowing that whatsoever good thing any man doeth, the same shall receive it of the Lord, whether he be bond or free. And ye masters, so now we get to the context where this is talking about the masters. Now, ye masters, do the same things unto them, forbearing, threatening, knowing that your master also is in heaven, neither is there respect of persons in him or with him. So what we're seeing here now is that what's going on is that we have now masters are thrown into this, as if, okay, basically both the slave and the master, you need to cooperate and love each other, basically trying to also revolutionize how then the slavery here for the Christian is to be then utilized, not to treat them like the pagans and all that, but even for those that were slaves to pagan rulers, it says to show compassion and not rebellion. But however, does this mean that it was in support of slavery? Absolutely not. And in fact, I did an essay a while back on the issue of, did, and I'm trying to see if I can find it right now. But I did do a thing where there was, stuff that was brought up about slavery with a guy, and what I didn't understand at first was, was it? Oh, maybe it does. But then I looked more and more into it, and I found out that even during the early period of Christianity, what you'd find was just a bunch of people trying to revolutionize and get the slaves out of their market. Essentially, they were trying to rescue slaves and pretty much be abolitionists, but they did it a lot differently than what you would find in most of the things today. I don't know if Adam is still watching, and I'm trying to see if I can find the old article that I did a while back on this, because I remember I made an article and I had uploaded it somewhere, so I'm trying to see if I can find it real quick. Let's see, maybe try it here. Hold up. All right, good. The thing didn't start going off. Because I want to go, because it's been a while, and I'm angry with myself on the fact that I didn't get to get the stuff there. Okay, we're at the old website, and we're trying to see if we can find the article that I wrote, because this was a interesting one for a friend named Penn Valentine, who wrote down that he made some comment a while back about how all of a sudden that that it was like Islam and here it is, Christianity harmful? All right, and it was a response to Penn Valentine, where he was basically saying Christians are no better than radical Muslims. Christianity has been spread through violence, massacres, torture, force, genocide, infanticide, and slavery since its inception. And so I wanted to cover the issue about slavery. And here's what I had covered. So, concerning what Philip Schaff, the church historian, wrote, he says, "Yet from the outset, Christianity has labored for this end, slaveries, not by impairing the right of property, not by outward violence nor sudden revolution. This, under the circumstances, would only have made the evil worse. But by its moral power, by preaching the divine descent and original unity of all men, through common redemption through Christ, the duty of brotherly love, and the true freedom of the Spirit, it placed slaves and masters on the same footing of dependence on God and of freedom in God, the Father, Redeemer, and Judge of both. It conferred inward freedom even under outward bondage, and taught obedience to God and for the sake of God even in the enjoyment of outward freedom." Unquote. That's from the 8-volume church history book from Philip Schaff. And so that was the whole perspective, is that they're not trying to say, hey, revolt or anything like that, because at that point, if they're saying that, then basically saying, hey, slaves, go kill yourselves, because that's what's going to happen, is it makes the situation worse and would just get these people killed. But instead, they're trying to help, number one, revolutionize it, and then number two, try to get them free from a different perspective. Because here's another thing. Lactantius, Lactantius, an early church author who was only an advisor to the Roman Emperor Constantine I, he was not only that, but he was also a tutor to his son. Lactantius, in the Divine Institutes, explains the following concerning the status of slaves in light of what Christianity teaches, which is this: "For as he distributes to all alike his one light, sends forth his fountains to all, supplies food, and gives the most pleasant rest of sleep, so he bestows on all equity and virtue. In his sight no one is a slave, no one a master, for if all have the same Father, by an equal right we are all children. No one is poor in the sight of God. But he who is without justice, no one is rich. But he who is full of virtues, no one in short is excellent. But he who has been good and innocent, no one is most renowned. But he who has abundantly performed works of mercy, no one is most perfect. But he who has fulfilled all the steps of virtue. Therefore neither the Romans nor the Greeks could possess justice, because they had men differing from one another by many degrees, from the poor to the rich, from the humble to the powerful, in short, from private persons to the highest authorities of kings. For where all are not equally matched, there is not equity, and inequality of itself excludes justice, the whole force of which consists in this, that it makes those equal who have by an equal lot arrived at the condition of this life." So this was an early church father who may have been later during the time of Constantine, but what about before that? You have Clement of Rome, who is a secretary of Rome during the 4th century AD, and it's actually mentioned in Philippians 4:3, by the way. But in his only epistle that we have surviving, he explains of how Christians should try to free slaves and help others by submitting them. And remember, this is the 1st century, where Clement says, to bring forward some examples from among the heathen, many kings and princes in times of pestilence, when they had been instructed by an oracle, have given themselves up to death, in order that by their own blood they might deliver their fellow citizens from destruction. Many have gone forth from their own cities, so that sedition might be brought to an end within them. We know many among ourselves, meaning our other Christians, who have given themselves up to bonds in order that they might ransom others. So in other words, much like, remember what we have in bondage by a debt or a prisoner thing, they offer themselves to then get the other person out of it, because that's how they did view it. The Romans would have viewed it as property. So hey, what's wrong if he leaves, as long as we get another one in return, a replacement, especially one that's a little more healthier as well. So they did that. Anyway, continuing, he says, Many too have surrendered themselves to slavery, that with the price which they received for themselves, they might provide food for others. So now, they even talk about getting themselves in so that they earn money, apparently, because that was a context in other instances of slavery, though not all of it was indicated with getting money for sure. But they did it so that way they could get money so that they can provide food for people. So there was ways that they were able to revolutionize and indicate this. Now, while not an authentic letter from Ignatius of Antioch, one of the pseudo-Ignatius of Antioch writings has, we have something known as the Apostolic Constitutions, which state the following about slavery, which is, say unto the people under you what Solomon the Wise says, honor the Lord out of your just labors, and pay the first fruits to him out of your fruits of righteousness, that your garners may be filled with fullness of wheat, and your presses may burst out with wine. Proverbs 3, verses 9 through 10. Therefore maintain and clothe those that are in want from the righteous labor of the unfaithful. And such sums of money are as collected from them in the manner aforesaid, appointed to be laid out in the redemption of the saints, the deliverance of slaves, and of captives, and of prisoners, and of those who have been abused, and of those that have been condemned by tyrants to single combat and death on account of the name of Christ. For the Scripture says, deliver those that are led to death, and redeem those that are ready to be slain, and do not spare. Proverbs chapter 24, verse 11. So we've gone over what the verses are of Scripture, and then we've gone over to historical church documents and as to what they say on these matters. So it's quite clear from the passages of Scripture, it's quite clear from history what is actually going on here. And so when we go back and examine the text that Sarah had tried to go over, it's not promoting slavery. In fact, you don't even see where it says this is an endorsement of slavery or anything like that. It's just simply saying, servants, be obedient to them. It's like, for example, imagine if this would be the scenario. You have someone that says, hey, there's someone that has been kidnapped, and they're being held for ransom. You know, they're tied up, they get assaulted, they get beaten, and then all kinds of other terrible stuff that I will not go into detail on here. And someone manages to get a hold of them. What's the one thing you tell them to do if they're still, in a position where they don't know what they're doing as much or anything like that? You'd say, fight back, try to kill him, try to rebel, try to resist, try to get out of this. In most cases, especially if the condition is that the person has been deprived of food, starved, or these other things, you're basically saying, hey, I want you to try to risk your life where you might possibly die to try to get out, because I disagree with it. So I don't like this thing so much that I want you to do anything. Don't try to remain calm and wait until police get there, until someone rescues, where we can try to figure this out since we know where you are and all this sort of stuff. Because that's what essentially was happening with eventually later on. And again, because Clement of Rome was around during the time of Paul, and he's trying to point out that there are people during his time period that are trying to rescue slaves. So he says, slaves, when it says servants be obedient to them, he's saying, make sure you don't anger them or do anything that's going to gut you to get killed or beaten and abused. Because in the context, as we noted from history and what Paul would definitely have an intention of mind, they're going to rescue them. This is what happens when we are ignorant of history and when we're ignorant of the context, because even in the very next verse, or in verse 9 actually, is in masters do the same things. It's trying to revolutionize the concept there so that this slavery, or at least the slaves that are using this, would act differently than the thing that's being established there. So that eventually, when that Roman authority is no longer there or too much there, then slavery at that point is, hey, no longer needed. Because it's pointed out that all are equal under God. In fact, that's what the whole chapter, the whole conclusion of the Ephesians is talking about, because you have children obey the parents. Parents, do not provoke your children to wrath. And then finally, brethren, be strong in the Lord. So the whole passage is about strength and hope. See, this is what we call exegesis. This is what we call looking into these matters. All right. Let's go ahead and finish up the rest of this that we can have left.
It's pointless. Then we are talking about then all morality is secular. If we are cherry picking, then all morality is secular.
Well, not necessarily. We haven't really got
There
to
is
this.
There is no divine origin of morality. It's all secular.
We haven't defined secular morality yet. We're working around to that. Bradley, did you want to say something?
No, I was just thinking. So couldn't someone just as well say that that you're the one doing the cherry picking and saying that there's only one clear interpretation of biblical ethic concerning slavery?
There are certain things that are up for interpretation. I don't question that. There are certain things in the Bible that can be interpreted and can be questioned. But slavery is not ambiguous. Slavery
well, real quick, when you said that the New Testament's very clear in condoning slavery,
yes.
Would you go as far as to say it even approves of slavery as an institution?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that seems like a very fringe view of which I've never heard before. Because there's.
It's not about whether or not it's a fringe view, dude. It's about that you don't see anywhere that it's condoning it in there. And that's where the problem is with Sarah here.
I can read the passages if you want.
Well, I know the ones that you referenced previously. I'm not trying to be debating, just try to get some clarification here. So, like, because the ones that you mentioned was as far as slaves obeying their masters, isn't. I mean, at the same time, you have them saying to obey also the laws of Rome. So isn't the way that Christians normally interpret that is more of a sort of not getting engaged with the political institutions and political leaders and stuff at the time, but instead just being. That's why Nietzsche said it was a slave morality. Is because they just.
No, Ephesians chapter 6, says, "Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in singleness of your heart, as unto Christ." It's unambiguous. The Bible sanctions slavery,
but it doesn't sanction it in that passage. It doesn't even say this is a sanctioned institution. We went over this earlier, of course, but hopefully Sarah gets this message and learns about this whole thing. But I think we're gonna just end it for there, because I think we got all we really needed from that. So we're gonna take a look at some of your comments in the live chat and see what to go off of. Oh, ready to join? All right, just find me on, because I think I saw you in one Discord server. Make some time to hang on. All right, I sent it to your Adam friended on the Discord server and sent a friend request while I'm at it. So I'll be waiting for you then. And I'll have a little bit of extra time. Main thing I'll do, I'll just wash my hair a bit and then I'll head to work. But I got a little bit of some time to discuss. If you're ready, just head on to Discord and I will be ready to have a conversation with you. But it'll have to be like just a few minutes. All right. Because I noticed on Twitter he said that he's not defending Christianity from a theological perspective. That's what apologists do. Yes, and that's what I'm doing for sure. But he's defending from a social science perspective, and I understand that. I did take some social sciences from college, my college days. When Christianity makes claims that are untrue scientifically, I reject those claims. Right, but they issue at the same time as well. I believe that there are indeed passages that do show, for example, flat Earth passages. Then I would go over the whole thing there. Think Clip says you're engaged in a debate with Sarah over interpretation because Sarah is objectively wrong on the meaning of words that we can examine in the context and in light of what it actually says. So if Sarah wants to speak for herself or defend herself, then she's more unlikely to do so. But you're the one that did say that you were ready to join, because that is what it says on your thing. So if you want to come in, all you got to do is just get on Discord and hit me up and call me or check, because I did see the friend request and all that there. Okay, let's see. see, Marshall has been going at it with them. Think Club says, I am skipping this debate because I don't care your reasoning for the slavery prohibition. I only care what most modern Christians believe slavery is immoral. But the problem is that you're also going to get some of those that do say that they believe that slavery is immoral concerning quote-unquote modern Christians, because I wonder what your definition of a modern Christian is, because it's not just simply saying, oh, I am a Christian. Because you can't just simply do that, because the same people... I've been in a church before. It was a Northern Baptist church where you had a woman in there that says she was a Christian. She believes Jesus is, a good person and all this sort of stuff. They said, but the Bible, it's a scumbag book. It promotes slavery, sexism, rape. It endorses all these things and condones it. And it was written by a bunch of Nimrods who were just suffering from heat exhaustion and wanted to be sexist and kill women. And it's like, but I'm a Christian. That's what Christianity teaches, that we must hate things in the Bible. There was another friend of mine who had been talking about one of their family members who said that, Paul was a sexist and that we must reject the half of the New Testament and only follow the red letters. So we have different... probably different definitions of what would be a constitution of what a Christian is, and if by your standard the Bible is what would indicate what the standard is for what a Christian is, the majority of these people that claim to be modern Christians would not follow and be a Christian under that definition, under that context. So I don't know why you said you wanted to join and that you were ready to join if you're saying now you're going to skip it. I don't understand where the whole flip-flop just came there. I mean, it just makes no sense to me. So let's see what Marshall's been saying, because we'll at least then do that. Your brother said read Exodus 21. Okay. Alright, so we're just mainly getting to them. They're having their own conversation, and we're not going to really try to engage too much in it. And I guess at this point that Adam is not going to try to come inside the chat, because he did say he wanted to join, but now he's backing off for some reason. So that being said, we are going to be ending the show at this point. So yeah, let me first get the music playing, get some Terminal D. All right. There we go. Well, that's been it, and it's been an interesting show, so thank y'all for tuning in. My only advice is that Adam friended, while I understand that he is focusing on perspectives of this from a whatever the perspective, I think what's needed and what's really important here is the fact that you cannot consistently defend Christianity or even morality or Christian morality from their perspective without having to think like a Christian. So while you claim it's not theological, everything is a theological perspective, and you're actually engaging in it because you do know God exists and are utilizing what you know from God and what He has given you, because you are made in His image. As for Sarah, she needs to learn a bit more about this stuff on hermeneutics, on how we understand this passage, and how church history, we have seen even from the first century, people have tried to free slaves, and that there were abolitionists that took the words of Scripture to be the means of pointing out these things, and that the same passages she used are actually passages of trying to save people. Those are things to keep in mind. But anyways, thank y'all for tuning in. This has been RC Apologist. Y'all take care.